one of the things that you can, I think this heightens the meaning in your life, is to try to do difficult things, right? Aim high. Don't aim so damn high you can't manage it, and make sure you break down your aims into reasonably attainable sub-goals, but you want to aim high, and then you want to see how hyper efficient you can get. That's a great thing to do in your early 20s, is to see, okay, like discipline yourself. You think, okay, how much work can I do if I load myself right to the maximum? How far can I work? How hard can I work until I exhaust myself? And then you back off, obviously, because the optimal amount of working, productive engagement, let's say, is that which is sustainable across decades. So you have to learn that, but you don't learn that without stretching yourself to your limits to begin with. And, you know, if your life isn't everything it could be, and if you're suffering from an excess of meaninglessness, well, it means you're not oriented in the world of chaos and order properly. It's like you could learn to discipline yourself. Figure out what it is that you need to do and that you want to do, and then see how efficient you can get. Because one of the things that's quite fun is to figure out, if you have a task, I always tell my graduate students this if they're doing an experiment too. If you have a task that you have to do, it's really interesting to spend a few minutes, sometimes hours, depending on how long the task is. See if you can figure out how to do it from 5 to 10 times faster. It means you'll have to rearrange the way you think about it, but you can often do it. And that's how extremely productive people get so hyper efficient.
You need structure, you need predictability, and you need more of it than you think, just to keep you sane. Now, if you're lucky, and maybe a bit odd, you can deviate 5% from the norm, or 10% from the norm, or something like that, carefully and cautiously, as long as the rest of you is all well ordered in a normative manner. You might be able to get away with that, and you might be able to sustain it across time, and people might be able to tolerate you if you do it, or maybe you'll get really lucky and you happen to be creative but reasonably well put together, and people will actually be happy that there's something idiosyncratic and unique about you. But even under those circumstances, mostly what you want is to have a routine, it's disciplined, it's predictable, and bloody well stick to it. You're going to be way healthier and happier and saner if you do that. And then the other thing that you need, because this is one of the things the psychoanalysts got wrong, I think, is that they overestimated the degree to which sanity was a consequence of being properly structured internally, you know? Because from the psychoanalytic point of view, you're sort of an ego, and that ego is inside you. And of course, it rests on an unconscious structure, but the purpose of psychoanalysis is to sort out that unconscious structure and the ego on top of it, and to make you a fully functioning and autonomous individual. But there's a problem with that, because the reason that you're sane as a fully functional and autonomous human being isn't because you've organized your psyche, even though that's important. The reason that you're sane if you have a well-organized unconscious and ego is because other people can tolerate having you around for reasonably extensive periods of time, and will cuff you across the back of the head every time you do something so stupid that people will dislike you permanently if you continue. And so what people are doing to each other all the time, just non-stop, is broadcasting sanity signals back and forth, right? It's like you smile at people if they're not only behaving properly, but behaving in a way that you would like to see them continue to behave. You frown at them if they're not, you ignore them if they're not, you shun them, you roll your eyes at them, you manifest a disgust face, you don't listen to them, you interrupt them, you won't cooperate with them, you won't compete with them. It's like you're blasting signals at other people about how to regulate their behavior so frequently, well, it just makes up all of your social interaction. That's why we face each other, and we have emotional displays on our face, and we're looking at each other's eyes, and we know as much as we can about what's going on with each other, given that we don't have immediate access to the contents of their consciousness. And so partly what you're doing with your routine is establishing yourself as a credible, reliable, trustworthy, potentially interesting human being who isn't going to do anything too erratic at any moment. And everyone else is around there tapping you into shape, making sure that that's exactly what you are. And that's how you stay sane. And so what happens to people too, if they don't have a routine and they get isolated, is they start to drift.
You cite a tired brain, foggy thinking, as the reason to stop answering questions or giving a talk. How do you combat this while working or writing daily? Well, I eat a big breakfast relatively soon on waking. That really helps. If any of you out there are anxious, and many of you no doubt are, there'll be a large number of you who are anxious and don't eat breakfast. There'll be a whole bunch of you out there who think, well, I don't eat breakfast. It isn't necessary. It's like, that's wrong. It's necessary. You fasted all night. If you load yourself cognitively or physiologically in the morning, your brain, stressed, will encourage your body to produce insulin. It will take all the blood sugar out of your blood, and then you're done for the day. And then you'll be anxious. And a lot of the rest of you too, you'll find if you're anxious, try this. It's really, really interesting experiment. The next time you're anxious, go eat something. Eat some protein and fat would be best. You could have cheese and crackers. I'm not a big fan of carbohydrates, but whatever. Eat whatever you're willing to eat, but make it solid. Don't eat a peanut butter, or don't eat a chocolate bar or something sweet. Eat something substantial, a piece of meat, a piece of cheese, some peanut butter, something like that. And then wait 10 minutes and see if you're less anxious. And try that for like 2 weeks. Every time you get anxious, eat something. Because then you can find out if your anxiety is linked to low blood sugar. And it's very likely that it is, especially if you also get irritable and foggy in your thinking. And the best way to treat that, as far as I've been able to tell, and there's a decent literature on this, is to make sure that you eat a big breakfast. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, who the hell cares if you're hungry? I didn't say enjoy your breakfast. I said eat it. That's not the same thing. There's lots of things that you need to do that you don't enjoy to begin with. You'll get hungry in 6 months, and then you'll start to enjoy it. So that's a massive difference. I take small naps quite frequently. If I'm wiped out, I'll go have a nap for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then that helps quite a lot. I try to wake up on a fairly regular schedule. That's another thing I would really recommend for people whose lives are in disarray and who are anxious. Try to fix your wake time. Going when you sleep, that's not so important. So you can still, stay up late and have fun and all that. But getting up in the morning is really helpful. So, and you also have to figure out how much you can work or write. I can't write for more than about my sustainable maximum for writing is 3 hours a day. And if I push it past that, then, especially if I'm editing, I make mistakes when I'm editing, so that's counterproductive, and I can't sustain it across time. And so I don't really think you can do more than about 3 hours of extremely intense intellectual work a day. Although if you have a nap, you can stretch that, but I think at least I end up paying for it across time. So nap, make sure you eat, and make sure that you get enough sleep. So that's how I combat it and try to make myself hyper efficient.
Young people like to think about ways to change the world, right? And that's actually a positive part of their development. It's a stage that the developmental psychologist Jean Piaget called the messianic stage, and he associated that with late adolescence. While young people want to change the world, the problem is that that's been harnessed into attempts to change other people. But that isn't what you should do. If you want to change the world, you should change yourself. In the sense that Alexander Solzhenitsyn said when he analyzed the Soviet Union, he said, don't be thinking that the line that divides good from evil runs down a political spectrum or countries or something like that. It runs right down the middle of your soul. And if you want to sort out the world, then what you do is you sort yourself out. It's a serious business. They say it's more difficult to rule yourself than to rule a city, because you're complicated and there are horrible monsters inside of you that need to be tamed and to be brought into alignment and submission so that you can be a powerful and useful person. And instead of rushing out there to change the world by changing other bad people, that they should look inward and sort themselves out properly. And if you have a memory that's more than 18 months old, approximately, and when you pull that memory up to mind, if you still have an emotional reaction, that means you haven't fully articulated the memory. You haven't analyzed it causally. You haven't freed yourself from its grasp, and you're carrying it like a weight. And your brain responds to that. Like the more weight you're carrying like that, more baggage, let's say, the more of the stress hormone cortisol your brain produces. And cortisol makes you old. Divide your life up into 6 epochs. And then divide each of those, that might be, say, birth to kindergarten, and then maybe elementary school, and then maybe junior high school, however you want to do it. And then to write about the emotionally significant events in each of those epochs, and then to describe their effects on you.
and then to analyze how you did in those situations, what you might have done differently, what you might have do differently in the future, to straighten out your past. Let's say you want to become who you could be in the fullest sense. So let's say you're someone who's going to solve some serious problems. Okay, the first thing you have to do is admit to the seriousness of the problems. That's no joke. And so the first thing is just the terror of the problem itself. And that's enough to paralyze you, right? And that's the Hydra, that's the Gorgon with the head of snakes. It'll paralyze you and turn you to stone. That's the basilisk in the Harry Potter series. You look at it and it turns you to stone and lurks underneath everything, right? And it's malevolence and tragedy. And so there's that. And then the next is, well, you're going to take responsibility for that? You're really going to do that, are you? That's a hell of a load, man. And so it's daunting to even consider that. And then there's the discipline and responsibility that necessitates, which is also daunting. It's like, oh my God, the problem's that serious? I'm really going to have to get my act together in order to not contribute to it, much less solve it. And so the problem is terrible, and then the solution is daunting. But the upside of that is like, well, there isn't anything better to have than a problem that's worth solving, like that's really worth solving, right? And so the more of that you take on, the more you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, no matter what. Like, I'm getting up, I'm trudging forward. Doesn't matter what I'm suffering from, I've got things that need to be done. They're necessary. And that gives you that sense of purpose that is the antidote to bitterness. Okay, well, let's say you want your life to be meaningful. It's like, okay, then what you do matters. It actually matters. Or how starting to clean up the room changed their life. That's quite fun because it's something I always tell people to do instead of going out and protesting. Jesus, I just can't stand that.
Cleaning up the room?
Yeah.
Meaning?
Well, my sense is that if you want to change the world, you start from yourself and work outward, because you build your competence that way. It's like, I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized. Well, I made a video call, which was called Message to Millennials, where it was called How to Change the World Properly. A bit of it on the pretentious side, I suppose, but I was trying to produce something that was a counterposition to this idea that what you should do is go out and fix up other people. You know, that's just not right. And there's a New Testament line about that, something about, you know, not worrying too much about the log in your neighbor's eye, or about the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your eye. What would the world be like if people stopped avoiding the things they knew they should do? You know, because the question is, how much are we contributing to the fact that life is an existential catastrophe and a tragedy? How much is our own corruption contributing to that? That's a really worthwhile question. Things you leave undone because you're angry, you're resentful, you're lazy, you have inertia. Well, you consult your conscience and it says, well, you know, that place over there could use a little work. It's the same as working on yourself, and so you clean that up because you can. And then things are a little clearer around you. And you're a little better off because you've practiced a bit, and so you're a little stronger, and then something else manifests itself and says, well, maybe you could like take a crack at fixing me up too. So you decide to do that, and then that gets a little bit more pristine, you know, and soon, and it's humble because you're not exceeding your domain of competence. You know, it's like, don't be fixing up the economy, 18-year-olds. You don't know anything about the economy. It's a massive, complex machine beyond anyone's understanding, and you mess with it at your peril. So, and can you even clean up your own room? No. Well, you should think about that. You should think about that. What could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to. And maybe so others don't have to either. It's something like that. You know, like there's a real injunction at the bottom of it. It's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. Now, and you could say, well, I don't care about that, but that's actually not true. You actually do care about that, because if you're in pain, you will care about it. And so you do care about it, even if it's just that negative way, you know. It's very rare that you can find someone who's in excruciating pain who would ever say, well, it would be no better if I was out of this.
sort of pain is one of those things that brings the idea that it would be better if it didn't exist along with it. It's incontrovertible. So you get your act together so that there isn't any more stupid pain around you than necessary. Well, so then the question might be, well, how would you go about getting your act together? And the answer to that, and this is a phenomenological idea too, it's something like, look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. So now you think, well, let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you like, there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe little order there would be a good thing, and there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix. And I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, the easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. If something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then, hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that. So you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbles towards you and, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain of competence. But most of the time, if people look at their lives, it's a very interesting thing to do. I like the idea of the room, because you can do that at the drop of a hat. You go back to where you live and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this place better for half an hour. What should I do? And you have to ask. And things will just pop up like mad. And it's partly because your mind is a very strange thing. As soon as you give it an aim, a genuine aim, it'll reconfigure the world in keeping with that aim. That's actually how you see to begin with. And so if you set it a task, especially, you have to be genuine about it, which is why you have to bring your thoughts and emotions together, and then you have to get them in your body so you're acting consistently. You have to be genuine about the aim, but once you aim, the world will reconfigure itself around that aim, which is very strange. And it's technically true. The best example of that, you have all seen this video where you watch the basketballs being tossed back and forth between members of the white team versus the black team, and while you're doing that, a gorilla walks up into the middle of the video and you don't see it. It's like, you know, if you thought about that experiment for about 5 years, that would be about the right amount of time to spend thinking about it. Because what it shows you is that you see what you aim at. And that, man, if you can get one thing through your head as a consequence of even being in university, that would be a good one. You see what you aim at. And so because one inference you might draw from that is, be careful what you aim at, right? What you aim at determines the way the world manifests itself to you. And so if the world is manifesting itself in a very negative way, one thing to ask is, are you aiming at the right thing? Now, you know, I'm not trying to reduce everybody's problems to an improper aim. People get cut off at the knees for all sorts of reasons. You know, they get sick, they have accidents. There's a random element to being, that's for sure. And so you don't want to take anything, even that particular phrase, too far. You want to bind it with the fact that random things do happen to people, but it's still a great thing to ask. If you write a book, which is virtually impossible, and then get a publisher, which is virtually impossible, you probably have a rejection rate of 99%. So then if you do manage to publish the book with a reasonable publisher, which you won't because it's impossible, then you get 8% royalties. That's it. So 92% of your labor goes to the sales, marketing, and distribution end of things. And so it's very, very difficult to generate capital as an entrepreneur. And there's innumerable impediments. One of the things that people do, and this is something for those of you who might be entrepreneurially minded, here's another thing that you have to understand, is that you can't really create a product and then launch it. Because first of all, you don't know how to do that. You might know how to create the product, but you do not know how to market or sell it. You don't know how to advertise it. You don't know how to communicate about it. You don't know how to ship it. Like, there's all sorts of things you just don't know. But worse is you don't know if people will use it. And so what companies do that roll out new products on a relatively continual basis do is they don't develop the product and then go sell it. They continually communicate with their customers about what product the customer is willing to buy next, and then they develop that. And so you have to have your market identified, and then you have to be in continual communication with the market while you develop the product. It's not, I build a better mousetrap and the world comes, you know, marching to my door. That isn't how it works. Is that you got to find out if someone wants to buy your stupid thing. And then the next thing is that even if you have a great thing, you're going to go talk to people and they have 50 great things that they might buy. And they're all great, but they're not going to buy all 50. They might buy one, maybe, and maybe they'll buy it this week, but probably they'll buy it in 6 months. And they're not going to buy any of them, no matter how great, unless they're on fire and you're selling water. Because they're so busy already, right? They're so overwhelmed and preoccupied by their jobs that if you come in and you say, well, here, this is going to increase your efficiency by 20%, and here's the 3 weeks you'd have to spend doing that, and then the payoff would come in the next years, they'll say, yeah, well, I'll do that as soon as I have time. And as soon as I have time is never. So if they're on fire and you have water, you can sell it to them. But that's all, because otherwise it's a no-go. So those are all things that are worthwhile knowing, because they're very hard to learn. And very comically, I mean, if you would have told me when I first started developing these tests that one of the reasons corporations wouldn't buy them was because they worked, that I would have just thought, really? I mean, come on, really? That's really the reason? It's like, yeah, that's the reason. God. So very, very, very problematic. And then they already have their processes in place and they're entrenched. And then the next problem is, you know, you haven't got any customers. I think I told you that before. You don't have any customers and you show them the statistics, but they can't understand the statistics. And they also have 200 other people selling them things, and 50 of them are crooks. So they're just lying about what they're doing, and they can't tell the difference between the liars and the people who are telling the truth. And so they can't understand the statistics for themselves, and they can't verify them anyways. So what they ask you is, who else is using it? And if the answer is, well, everybody, then you don't even have to do the sale because you're already rich. And if the answer is nobody, then they're going to say, well, why is nobody using this? You say, well, it's the hottest thing that's come along. And they think, well, I'm not going to be the sucker who gets painted, you know, red and fired because this failed. That they do not think this might make me succeed. People do not care about whether or not they succeed. They care about whether or not they fail. And so that's another thing, is that if you're marketing something and you can say, this will stop you from being identified as a failure, then people might be happy about that. But if you say, this will really help you succeed, it's like, yeah, no, I don't want to succeed. I just don't want to fail. I don't want to succeed. I just want to be invisible and be left alone. And if you're looking for people's fundamental motivation, that's it. It's they want to be invisible and they want to be left alone. I tell you the zebra story? Any of you know that story? Okay, I'll tell you this zebra story. Stop me if I've told it to you before. This tells you everything you need to know about human beings. So it's worth knowing. Okay, so zebras have stripes. And people say, well, that's for camouflage. And then you think about that for 2 seconds and you think, that's a really stupid theory, because lions are camouflaged and they're like golden like the grass. And zebras are black and white, so you can see a zebra 5 miles away. It's like, there's a zebra, it's black and white. So the whole camouflage thing, that's just not working out so well as a hypothesis. Okay, so biologists go and they decide to take a look at some zebras. And so they're looking at a zebra on the herd, because there's no zebra, right? Just like there's no fish. There are schools of fish and there are herds of zebras. There isn't a fish. This is why I think the cod aren't coming back. There are no cod. There are massive 100-mile-long schools of cod, 10 stories deep, 20 million years old. You wipe out the school, you don't just get to throw a cod in the water and say, well, you know, off you go. It's like, well, where's my city? It's like launching you in the middle of a field. It's like, well, go out there and reproduce. It's like, no, that's not going to happen, you know? So without the school, there's no cod, and you can't just introduce a whole school of cod because you don't have a whole school of cod. So, you know, maybe the cod are never coming back. And zebras are the same thing. There's not a zebra. There's zebras. And so you're looking at the zebras, trying to study a zebra, and you look at the zebra and you make some notes and you look up and you think, oh, Christ, which zebra was I looking at? And the answer to that is you don't know, because the camouflage is against the herd. And the black and white stripes. There's a variety of reasons for the stripes. Flies also seem not to like the stripes, but you know, usually things evolve for multiple reasons. But anyways, it's very difficult to parse out a zebra against the herd. You look down, you look up, it's like, uh-oh, all those damn zebras look the same. Yes, the camouflage is effective, but it's against the herd. All right, so then you think, well, we better identify a zebra so we can see what he's up to. So then you take your Jeep and a can of red paint and a stick with a rag on the end of it, and you drive up to the zebras and you paint their haunch red a little bit, put a nice red dot on their haunch, or maybe clip their ear with a cattle clip. And then you stand back and you think, hey, I'm pretty smart, now I'm going to watch that zebra. So what do you think happens to the zebra? The lions kill it. Right, because lions, they're smart, right? Hunting animals are smart. But they have to identify a zebra before they can organize their hunt. They can't just hunt the whole herd. They have to pick out a zebra. And so maybe it's like a zebra that's got a sore hip or something. And so you think, well, nature's kind. It just takes the weak. It's no, zebra or lions like really healthy, delicious zebras. But they look like all the other healthy, delicious zebras, so they can't get a bead on them. But if they're small and just born, or if they're limping, or there's something that identifies them, then the lions can pick them out. And then they do pick them out. And so the rule for human beings is keep your damn stripes on so the lions don't get you. And I'm telling you, man, if you want to remember one thing from my class about human motivation, that's a good thing to learn. People camouflage themselves against the herd, and they like to be in the middle of the herd, which is what fish do, by the way. If you have a big school of fish, the smart, healthy, large fish are in the middle of the school. Because you know what you call fish on the outside of the school? Bait. Right. So that's what people are doing. They're trying to move into the middle of the herd all the time. And the herd moves around, or the school moves around, and people are going, well, I'm in the middle. I'm staying in the middle here. So I've got this protective ring of people around me so the predators don't pick me out and do me in. So, okay, so that's part of the reason why I said, well, you can't sell something to someone for success, because you're thinking, well, people are aiming at success. Don't be thinking that. It's not by any means necessarily true. Trait neuroticism is a powerful motivator. And trait neuroticism is, let's not be too threatened or hurt, right? That's the negative emotion system. And the negative emotion system is a killer source of motivation. You also see that there are scales of well-being that have been designed, mostly by social psychologists, which means they're very bad scales most of the time, because their psychometric capacity is absurdly low, generally speaking. So what you find with scales of well-being, sometimes they're talked about as scales of happiness even, is that people aren't after happiness, they're after not hurting. It's not, so they don't want to be extroverted and enthusiastic, right, and bubbly and full of smiles and laughter. That isn't what they mean by I want to be happy. What they mean is I don't want to be anxious or in pain. And so well-being scales tend to be something like neuroticism, emotional stability plus extroversion. But the big loading is on emotional stability, the reverse of neuroticism. You want to avoid suffering. You don't want to be happy. You want to avoid suffering. And one way to avoid suffering is not to let the lions gnaw on you. And one way of doing that is to stay in the middle of the damn herd. And so, like, I'm not being a smart aleck about this. I understand why people do that. There's real danger to being visible. There's real danger in being visible. Now, you might be successful if you're visible, but you also might be dead. I wouldn't consider myself either naive or particularly optimistic person. I don't think I'm either of those. But this isn't actually an idea. This is one of the only ideas that I've ever found that I really believe to be rock solid. I actually think that it's true. And it's very optimistic because it says you can use your sense of meaning to calibrate your progress through life. But there's rules. You have to aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive. Now, and that's subject to update, because what the hell do you know? But you start by aiming at the star you can see rather than the dimmer one that you can't yet perceive. And then you decide that you're going to do that honestly, right? That's a big decision. So the first decision, I think, in some sense, is a decision of love. You're going to decide that being is worthwhile and that you're going to work for its betterment. And that's a decision that's based on love. And the second decision is based on truth. Having made that decision, you're going to play a straight game. Having made those two decisions, I think that you can allow your sense of meaning to calibrate your pathway. And then what's so interesting is that you hit a state that's as close to paradisal as you're going to hit right away, because being engaged like that, it's better to be engaged in the solution of a complex problem than not to have a problem at all. And that's no different than saying it's better for there to be being than non-being, because being is a problem. And so if you want to have no problems, then you have no being. And you could say, well, being is so miserable that maybe that's the route we should take. And fair enough, but maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the damn problem. It can be a problem worth solving, and you can be so engaged in solving the problem that it justifies the fact that the problem exists. And then you get to have the problem and the solution at the same time, and maybe that's better than not having the problem at all. And I believe that, because one of the things I have seen, and I've seen this being so interesting when I've been lecturing to people, especially more recently, and this has also manifested itself on YouTube. I'm talking to people a lot about responsibility, and it's young men in particular that seem to be responding to that. And I think that's partly because I think that young women, in some sense, have their responsibility map already laid out for them. It's also less voluntary in some sense for women, because they have more complicated problems to solve in the first part of their life, right? Because they have to get the family problem solved. But whatever. I've been talking in a very delineated manner about responsibility, which is a strange thing to sell to people, but responsibility is what gives your life meaning. And so then you might say, well, then take on ultimate responsibility. And what happens? You have an ultimately meaningful life. And then you might say, well, if your life is ultimately meaningful, doesn't matter if it's punctuated by tragedy or even predicated on tragedy. It's worth it. And I think that's true. And everything I've seen indicates to me that's true. Every time I get my clients to take on more responsibility, and it isn't an injunction. You're a bad person, you should take on responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. You can define the damn responsibility. It isn't something that someone else should impose on you. It's not a matter of doing what you should do in some abstract manner. It's not that. It's the choice of what game you're going to play. And you can play the game of the seeker, I would say, and if you play that game, then everyone wins. And it's the best game you can play. And so the answer, in some sense, to the tragedy of life, to the catastrophe of life, to the fall, is to adopt the responsibility of mortality that goes along with that, and to play that game maximally. And paradoxically, it's in the willingness to do that that the solution emerges. And I don't, you know, I have done my best with every single thing I've talked to you guys about. I have done my best to do what Dostoevsky does in his novels, which is I make a proposition and then I spend months or years trying to figure out if I can take the bloody thing apart, if there's something wrong with it, because I want to find out. I want to hit it with a hammer and see if it breaks. And what I've been trying to do is to tell you all the things that I've gathered, let's say, or laid out or articulated or discovered over the last 30 years that I have not been able to break with the biggest hammer that I could take to them. And I guess that's the fundamental one, is that I believe that the idea that lurks in these images, derived from very different cultures, it's the same idea. Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. So if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. Because the rule is, you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt, it stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like, unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like, it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me for and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe. And that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. Could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly as an individual, because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it'd be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, and not everyone does, but, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far could you take that? If you stopped wasting time, and if you stopped lying, and if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say, why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out. You don't have anything better to do. And there's nothing in it, as far as I've been able to tell, there's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good. And then maybe you could help make that manifest in the world. And maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems then. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse. So, and then you think, well, what's the barrier? And the barrier is, are you willing to accept the responsibility? And part of the answer to that is, reduce the damn responsibility until it's tolerable. You don't have to fix everything at once. You could just start by fixing the things that you could fix. Or you could even do it more. You could do it with even less self-sacrifice. You could start by fixing only the things that you want to fix. God, you can get a massive way that way. So do it. See what happens. That's what you should have been taught in university right from the beginning. It's like, aim at the highest good. Tool yourself into something that can attain it. And go out there and manifest it in the world. And everything that comes your way will be a blessing. And so all you have to do is give up your resentment and your hatred. I know that's a hard thing to give up because you have plenty of reason for it. That's probably a good place to stop. So it was a pleasure. It's known from multiple dimensions simultaneously that the system that produces happiness, let's say in the founder's sense, produces that emotion in relationship to the observation of movement towards a valued goal. And so you can derive some conclusions from that. The first is that without a goal, there's no happiness by definition, because happiness marks movement towards a valued goal. The next is, well, the higher the goal, the more value there is in the observation of movement towards it. And so out of that, you might ask, well, then what's the highest goal? Because why don't we go for that? Well, then you could say, well, you should do your best for the best. You might say, well, that's just to make me hedonically happy. It's like, well, wait a second, cocaine will work for that, because it actually even activates this system. But what about tomorrow and next week and next month? And so the problem with hedonism as a goal is, first of all, it vanishes when you're suffering. But even failing that,
If you're serving yourself hedonically in the narrow sense, it's just about me and my pleasure. It's like, okay, which you? Today's you, tomorrow's you, next week's you, next month's you. What about next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You're going to lead a hedonic and dissolute life, and what are you going to be, a burnt out shell and a wreck, a dismal wreck in 10 years? Because that's what'll happen. And so if you don't construe yourself as a community stretched out across time, then you're not even serving yourself. And if you do construe yourself as a community stretched across time, then serving other people and serving yourself turn out to be exactly the same thing. I just did a course on the Sermon on the Mount, and Christ, in one of the sections of that sermon, he says to people that you shouldn't lose your saltiness, you shouldn't lose your savor, and you're the salt of the earth, and without that salt, everything loses its flavor. And salt is a preservative, and it's a spice, and that's often conceptualized, that phrase, as referring to the salt of the earth, you know, the solid, reliable types who bear all burdens. But that is not what it means. I looked at a lot of different translations. I talked to a lot of people about that verse, and really what it means is, well, there should be some spiciness and unpredictability and humor about you. And there should be some play in the system, right? Because that's what stops you from just being the narrow, dead, past letter of the law with no spirit. There should be some snake inside the tree, right? There should be some fire inside the bush. Those are all ways of construing that are symbolically equivalent. There should be some dynamism in you, and a fair bit of that's associated with, well, enthusiasm. That's fun, but enthusiasm means to be imbued with the Spirit of God. That's why people like comedians so much too, because that's what they do. And so you have to leaven the duty with humor, and your book does a lovely job of that too, because your book, which is a very conservative book in the best possible way, and is a call to duty and responsibility, but you constantly return to themes of both stoicism and humor, which are tied together in some sense, you know. I was just in Newfoundland for the last week doing a documentary there. Newfoundland's a rough rock, and it's beautiful and harsh. And the people there are tough and resilient, man, because they had to be. And Newfies have a great sense of humor, and they're always making fun. And that's a necessary leaven, right? That ability to deal with serious matters in a light with a light touch. And it's something I'm trying to learn to do more and more, even in the most serious of conversations, you know, because if you're a master, you've got both. You've got that light touch and that sense of humor. You really see that in military people who've been through rough situations. When you see someone in the depths of genuine suffering, hopefully what you're trying to do is to throw a lifeline. And one possible lifeline is compassion. And that's probably the right lifeline to throw an infant, you know, who's suffering. That sort of overwhelming compassion. But for someone who is an adult or making progress towards being an adult, the lifeline that might be thrown is there's something within you that would let you be more than you are, and much more, and maybe enough more so that you could actually deal with this suffering so it didn't turn into hell and take everything along with it. And there isn't anything more optimistic than that. You say something here, which I think is I'm going to read something from your book here. It is true that character is to some extent innate. I would say what that does is that it provides each of us with a range of talents and a range of temptations. And so it's something like that. So it's the hand we're dealt, and there's certainly a genetic element to that. Our genetic makeup imbues in us certain proclivities. But it is as true that character is mostly a consequence of choices. Strangely enough, we all make them, and we should make them deliberately, with the knowledge that these choices are part of our responsibility toward a purpose other than our own selfish aims. That responsibility is to your family, friends, community, and country. That's something that conservatives put forward as a pathway to virtue, you know. And what's so interesting about that, as far as I'm concerned, as an antidote to atomistic liberalism, let's say, that hyper-privileges the individual, is that it's definitely been my observation as a clinical psychologist that in the depths of misery, the capability that you have to be of service to other people, your family, your friends, your community, your country, that's actually a saving grace under such circumstances. You know, and that people really find a deep and abiding meaning in that service. So it's not just finger wagging and the pointing towards duty. It's like, no, you don't understand that if you're in desperate straits, if your life is falling apart, if you're nihilistic and miserable, and maybe you have your bloody reasons, because maybe you do, that's still the case that if you step outside yourself and you try to make the lives of other people better, that's the best possible thing that you can do for yourself.
How to think about motivation? We'll think about it from the hypothalamic perspective. So we could say one thing that motivation does is set goals. And we could say that emotions track progress towards goals. And I'm going to use that schema, even though it's not exactly right. So you say, well, motivation determines where you're going to aim. So if you're hungry, you're going to aim at something to eat. And then that will organize your perceptions so that you zero out everything that isn't relevant to that task, which is almost everything. You concentrate on those few things that are going to facilitate your movement forward. When you encounter those things, that produces positive emotion as you move through the world towards your goal, and you see that things are laying themselves out that facilitate your movement forward. Those things cause positive emotion. And if you encounter anything that gets in the way, then that produces negative emotion, and it can be like threat, because you're not supposed to encounter something that gets in the way. It can be anger, so that you move it away. It can be frustration, disappointment, grief. Those would, if you had a response that serious to an obstacle, it would probably punish the little motivated frame right out of existence. You know, so you walk downstairs and, I don't know, the contracting company has set a wrecking ball through your kitchen. It's like, that's going to be disappointing. You're not going to keep eating the peanut butter sandwich in the rubble. That little frame is going to get punished out of existence, and some new goal is going to pop up in its stead. And, you know, one of the things we're going to try to sort out is, how do you decide when you've encountered an obstacle that's so big that you should just quit and go do something else? Because that's not obvious. You know, and you can get into counterproductive persistence pretty easily. So we don't know how people solve that problem. It's a really complicated one. So anyways, we're going to work on that scenario. Your hypothalamus pops up micro goals that are directly relevant to biological survival. That produces a frame of reference. So it's not a goal, it's not a drive, and it's not a collection of behaviors. It's a little personality. And the personality has a viewpoint, it has thoughts that go along with it. It has perceptions, it has action tendencies, all of that. You can see this in addiction, most particularly. So one of the things that you find often with people who are alcoholic is they lie all the time. And that's because when they've built a little alcohol-dependent personality inside of themselves, or a big one, maybe it's 90% of their personality, and one of the things that consists of is all the rationalizations that they've used over the years to justify their addiction to themselves and to other people. And so the addiction has a personality, you know, and so when the person is off, or maybe they're addicted to meth or something like that, where, you know, the addiction is more, it's more short-term powerful than, I would say, than an alcohol addiction. They'll say anything. And the words are just tools used to get towards the goal. And if they happen to be deceptive, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're just practical tools to get towards the goal. And then when you get towards the goal and you take a nice shot of meth or something like that, you reinforce all those rationales that you used to get the drug, and then the next time you're even a better deceiver and liar. So, okay, so we're going to say motivations, one way of thinking about it is they set goals, but it's not the right way of thinking about it. They produce a whole framework of interpretation. And so we're going to think about that framework of interpretation. And then emotions emerge inside of that. So that's it. So the world is framed, motivation set goals. You could say the world has to be framed. So motivation sets that frame, goals, emotions, perceptions, and actions. And then actions track progress. So positive emotion says you're moving forward properly towards your goal. And if you encounter something you don't expect, you stop. That's anxiety. It's like, oh, we're not where we thought we were. And so we don't know what to do. So we should stop because we don't know where we are or what we're doing. Stop, frozen. And then the more powerful negative emotions like pain, they might make you get out of there. So emotions, forward, stop, reverse. That's your emotions within that motivated frame. So, and that's another example of how your mind is embedded in your body. Your emotions are like
They're offshoots of action tendencies. That's the right way to think about it, because action is everything fundamentally. So what are some basic motivations? Most of these are regulated by the hypothalamus, by the way, and that tells you just how important a control system it is. The other thing that's useful to know about the hypothalamus is that it has projections going up from it that are like tree trunks, and inhibitory projections coming down that are like grapevines. So you can kind of control your hypothalamus as long as it's not on too much, but if it's on in any serious way, it's like it wins. So partly what you do to stop yourself from falling under the dominion of your hypothalamus is to never ever be anywhere where its action is necessary, right? You don't want to go into a biker bar because you might find yourself in a situation where panicked defensive aggression is immediately necessary. You probably don't want that. You don't want the panic, you don't want the terror, you don't want the frenzied fight, you don't want any of that. You don't want to have to run away in absolute panic. So you just don't go there. And a huge part of how we regulate our emotions is just by never going anywhere where we have to experience them. And so that has very little to do with internal inhibitory control and everything to do with staying where you belong. The Myth of Mental Illness by Thomas Szasz, S-Z-A-S-Z. It's a classic. You should read it. If you're interested in psychology, read it. Like, it's a classic. And he basically said, most people have problems in living. They don't have psychological problems. And so I've experienced, despite my love for the psychoanalysts, very frequently what I'm doing as a therapist is helping people have a life that would work. You know, and you can parameterize that. It's like, what do you need? How about some friends? That people kind of like that. How about an intimate relationship with someone that you can trust, that maybe has a future? That'd be good. How about a career that puts you in a dominance hierarchy somewhere, so at least you've got some possibility of rising, some possibility of stabilizing yourself, and a schedule and a routine, because no one can live without a routine. You just forget that. If you guys don't have a routine, I would recommend, like, you get one going, because you cannot be mentally healthy without a routine. You need to pick a time to get up, whatever time you want, but pick one and stick to it, because otherwise you dysregulate your circadian rhythms and they regulate your mood. And eat something in the morning. I've had lots of clients who've had anxiety disorders. I had one client who was literally starving. Very smart girl. There's very little that she liked. She kind of tried to subsist on like half a cup of rice a day. She came to me and said, I have no energy. I come home, all I want to do is watch the same movie over and over. What, like, is that weird? And I thought, well, it depends on how hard you work. You know, it's a little weird, but whatever. It's familiar. You're looking for comfort. So I did an analysis of her diet. It's like 3/4 of a cup of rice. It's like, you're starving. Eat something. You know, you'll feel better. So she modified her diet and all her anxiety went away and she had some energy. It's like, yeah, you got to eat. So a schedule, that's a good thing, man. Your brain will thank you for it. It will stabilize your nervous system. With a bit of a plan, that's a good thing. You need a career. You need something productive to do with your time. You need to regulate your use of drugs and alcohol, most particularly alcohol, because that does in a lot of people. You need a family, like the family you have, your parents and all that. It'd be nice if you all got along. You could work on that. That's a good thing to work on. And then, you know, you probably need children at some point. And that's life. That's what life is. And if you're missing, you know, you may have a good reason to not be operating on one of those dimensions. It's not mandatory. But I can tell you that if you're not operating reasonably well on 4, I think I mentioned 6, if you're not operating reasonably well on at least 3 of them, there's no way you're going to be psychologically thriving. And that's more pragmatic in some sense than psychological, right? Human beings have a nature. There's things we need. And if we have them, well, that's good. And if we don't have them, well, then we feel the lack. And so behaviorists, behavioral psychologists concentrate a lot more on that sort of thing. You know, it's practical. It's like strategizing. Make a career plan. Figure out how to negotiate, because that's bloody important. Figure out how to say what you need. Figure out how to tell the truth to people. Figure out how to listen to your partner in particular, because if you listen to them, they will actually tell you what they want, and sometimes you can give it to them and maybe they'll return the favor. And if you practice that for like 15 years, well, then maybe you're constantly giving each other what you want. Well, hooray, that would be good. And then there's two of you under most circumstances, and it's better to have two brains than one, because people think differently because of their temperament mostly. And so the negotiation is where the wisdom arises, and it's part of the transformation, the psychological transformation that's attendant on an intimate relationship, and one of the fundamental purposes of a long-term intimate relationship. And I would, think about this, because I'll tell you what it is that you need to do to be successful. Some of these things aren't so malleable, but others are things that you can work on. Well, IQ, well, that's a rough one, because there's no evidence, as far as I can tell, that you can do a damn thing about your IQ. I was just reading a paper by Dan Simon today. It's a relatively recent review. Dan Simon did the invisible gorilla stuff, and he was looking, because there's all these companies that claim that these online brain training exercises can produce cognitive improvements, and he reviewed the literature again. And I've reviewed that literature like 6 times in the last 15 years, because I keep hoping that someone will crack the problem, but it's always the same answer. It's like, you do brain training games, you get better at the game, a lot better at that game. You get slightly better at similar games, but distal games that are still heavily cognitively loaded doesn't affect your performance at all. Zero, none. So the issue of how to raise IQ, man, that's a killer. No one knows how to do it. I can tell you how to stop your IQ from decreasing as you get older. That's not so bad, because it does that. Fluid IQ decreases from the time you're 20, and pretty rapidly. It's physical health is the best preventative. So exercise, physical exercise. Weirdly enough, you think, well, why? Well, your brain uses oxygen like mad, right? And it needs to be kept clean and well oxygenated. And physical exercise, both like weightlifting, so anaerobic and aerobic exercise, both seem to be very, very effective at staving off cognitive declines across the lifespan. So that's a really useful thing to know, because that's the only thing we know that does that. So then the next best predictor of lifetime success is conscientiousness. Well, so, and of the two aspects of conscientiousness, say orderliness and industriousness, the better predictor is industriousness. So the question is, well, what can you do about your industriousness? And the answer to that is, well, that's kind of rough too, because there's a strong genetic component. But you can work on micro habits with regards to your conscientiousness. And I think the best micro habits, this is partly to do with this future authoring program processes, I think the best thing you can do with regards to your conscientiousness is to set up some aims for yourself, goals that you actually value. And the future authoring program helps people do that. And basically, it does a situational analysis of, it helps you do a situational analysis of your life more than a psychological analysis, I would say. And so the questions are something like, well, all right, you're going to have to put some effort into your life, and you need to be motivated to do that. And so what are the potential sources of motivation? Well, you could think about them in the big 5 manner. If you're extroverted, you want friends. If you're agreeable, you want an intimate relationship. If you're disagreeable, you want to win competitions. If you're open, you want to engage in creative activity. If you're high in neuroticism, you want security. Okay, so those are all sources of potential motivation that you could draw on, that you could tailor to your own, your own personality. But then there are dimensions that you want to consider your life across. And so we ask people about, well, if you could have your life the way you wanted it in 3 to 5 years, if you were taking care of yourself properly, what would you want from your friendships? What would you want from your intimate relationship? How would you like to structure your family? What do you want for your career? Well, how are you going to use your time outside of your job? And how are you going to regulate your mental and physical health, and maybe also your drug and alcohol use? Because that's a good place to auger down, because alcoholism, for example, wipes out, 5 to 10% of people. So you want to keep that under control. And then so maybe you develop a vision of what you would like your life to be, and that associates the goal. Well, once the goal is established, and then you break down the goal into micro processes that you can implement, the micro processes become rewarding in proportion in relation to their causal association with the goal, and that tangles in your incentive reward system. You know, we talked about the dopaminergic incentive reward system, and that's the thing that keeps you moving forward. And the way it works is that it works better if it produces positive emotion when it can see you moving towards a valued goal. Okay, well, what's the implication of that? Better have a valued goal, because otherwise you can't get any positive motivation working out. And so the more valuable the goal, in principle, the more the microprocesses associated with that goal start to take on a positive charge. And so what that means is, well, you get up in the morning and you're excited about the day, you're ready to go. And so as far as I can tell, what you do is you specify your long-term ideal. Maybe you also specify a place you want to stay the hell away from, so that you're terrified to fail as well as excited about succeeding, because that's also useful. You specify your goal. You do that in some sense as a unique individual. You want to specify goals that make you say, oh, if that could happen as a consequence of my efforts, it would clearly be worthwhile. Because the question always is, why do something? Because doing nothing is easy. You just sit there and you don't do anything. That's real easy. The question is, why would you ever do anything? And the answer to that has to be because you've determined by some means that it's worthwhile. And then the next question might be, well, where should you look for worthwhile things? And one would be, well, you could consult your own temperament. And the other would be, well, you kind of look at what it is that people accrue that's valuable across the lifespan. So you do a structural analysis of the subcomponents of human existence, and I already did that. You need a family, you need friends. Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, you know, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. You know, that's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering. So that's a bad deal for you. So once you set up that goal structure, let's say, and that's really in many ways that's what you should be doing at university. That's exactly what you should be doing, is trying to figure out who it is that you're trying to be, right? And you aim at that, and then you use everything you learn as a means of building that person that you want to be. And I really mean want to be. I don't mean should be, even those things are going to overlap. And it's important to distinguish between those, because that's partly, and this is back down to the micro routine analysis. So if I was saying, well, you're going to try to make yourself more industrious. Okay, number one, specify your damn goals, because how are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? That isn't going to happen. And often people won't specify their goals too, because they don't like to specify conditions for failure. So if you keep yourself all vague and foggy, which is real easy, because that's just a matter of not doing as well, then you don't know when you fail. And people might say, well, I really don't want to know when I fail, because that's painful. So I'll keep myself blind about when I fail. That's fine, except you'll fail all the time then. You just won't know it until you've failed so badly that you're done. And that can easily happen by the time you're 40. So I would recommend that you don't let that happen. So that's willful blindness, right? You could have known, but you chose not to. Okay, so once you get your goal structure set up, you think, okay, if I could have this life, it looks like that might be worth living, despite the fact that it's going to be, you know, anxiety provoking and threatening, and there's going to be some suffering and loss involved and all of that. Obviously, the goal is to have a vision for your life such that, all things considered, that justifies your effort. Okay, so then what do? Well, then you turn down to the micro routines. It's like, okay, well, this is what I'm aiming for. How does that instantiate itself day to day, week to week, month to month? And that's where something like a schedule can be unbelievably useful. Google Calendar. It's like, make a damn schedule and stick to it. Okay, so what's the rule with the schedule? It's not a bloody prison. That's the first thing that people do wrong. They say, well, I don't like to follow a schedule. Well, it's like, well, what kind of schedule are you setting up? Well, I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do this, you know, and then I just go play video games, because who wants to do all these things that I have to do? It's like, wrong. Set the damn schedule up so that you have the day you want. That's the trick. It's like, okay, I've got tomorrow. If I was going to set it up so it was the best possible day I could have, practically speaking, what would it look like? Well, then you schedule that, and obviously there's a bit of responsibility that's going to go along with that, because if you have any sense, one of the things that you're going to insist upon is that at the end of the day, you're not in worse shape than you were than at the beginning of the day, right? Because that's a stupid day. If you have a bunch of those in a row, you just dig, you dig yourself a hole and then you bury yourself in it. It's like, sorry, that's just not a good strategy. It's a bad strategy. So maybe 20% of your day has to be responsibility and obligation, or maybe it's more than that, depending on how far behind you are. But even that, you can ask yourself, okay, well, I've got these responsibilities. I have to schedule the damn things in. What's the right ratio of responsibility to reward? And you can ask yourself that, just like you'd negotiate with someone who is working for you. It's like, okay, you got to work tomorrow. Okay, so I want you to work tomorrow. And you might say, okay, well, what are you going to do for me that makes it likely that I'll work for you? Well, you could ask yourself that, So maybe you do an hour of responsibility and then you play a video game for 15 minutes. I don't know, whatever turns your crank, man. But, you have to negotiate with yourself and not tyrannize yourself. Like you're negotiating with someone that you care for, that you would like to be productive and have a good life. And that's how you make the schedule. It's like, and then you look at the day and you think, well, if I had that day, that'd be good. Great. And you're useless and horrible, so you'll probably only hit it with about 70% accuracy, but that beats the hell out of 0, right? And if you hit it even with 50% accuracy, another rule is, well, aim for 51% the next week, or 50.5% for God's sake, or because you're going to hit that position where things start to loop back positively and spiral you upward. And so that's one way that you can work on your conscientiousness, is plan a life you'd like to have. And you do that partly by referring to social norms. That's more or less rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. But the other way you do that is by having a little conversation with yourself about, as if you don't really know who you are, because you know what you're like. You won't do what you're told. You won't do what you tell yourself to do. You must have noticed that. It's like you're a bad employee and a worse boss. And both of those work for you. You don't know what you want to do, and then when you tell yourself what to do, you don't do it anyways. You should fire yourself and find someone else to be.
When my clients first come to see me, one of the things I often ask them is, okay, well, let's say you look a year ahead. What do you want? What are we aiming at? Your life isn't the way you want it to be. How would it look if it was the way you wanted it to be? Or at least partly that way. Then we aim at that, right? And we look for impediments, psychological impediments, fears, avoidance strategies, that sort of thing, and we develop strategies and we try to move towards that, I would say, ideal. All right, to understand the categories of myth, we'll say, we have to understand something about the nature of categorization. Now, categorization is a tricky thing, and we're going to run through some complicated ideas relatively quickly. You think you put things in the same category because they're similar, but the problem is that, first of all, that's not an answer. It's just a restatement of the initial proposition. And second of all, you can put things in the same category that are by no means identical, and you often do that. And third, things that are similar are often also importantly different, and so picking which element of similarity, like let's say you have a group of books. Well, are they the same? Well, obviously no, because unless they're all the same book. But the category of books is a pretty strange category because the content of the books differs completely. Well, you could still make a group of books and you pick some arbitrary element that unites them and consider that grounds to make a category. There's other categories, more scientific categories, and scientific categories tend to actually contain things that are very, very similar across multiple dimensions. Like protons are like that. As far as I can tell, there's nothing that distinguishes one proton from another, and the same with electrons. And the set of triangles is like that because you can define it precisely. But most of the categories that human beings use aren't so neat. And the problem with that is that unless the categories are neat, like scientific categories, it's very difficult to investigate them scientifically. So for example, you might do research on a group of people with anxiety disorders, but
the problem with that is that the anxiety disorder category is so heterogeneous that it's almost impossible to identify the commonalities across all the people who are in that category, and that's partly because the category isn't actually a scientific category. It's a hybrid category. It's a practical category. I can give you an example of that. No, I can't because I must not have saved it. Anyways, many of the DSM categories, so these are categories for psychopathology, require, if you're part of that category, imagine there's 7 symptoms that you could have, or 8 symptoms that you could have that would put you in that category, like antisocial personality. 8 symptoms: you steal, you kick, you hit, you bite, you're abusive. I don't remember the categories precisely, but you can be in the category if you have symptoms 2 through 5, and you can be in the category if you have symptoms 6 through 8. They aren't the same symptoms, but you're in the same category. And you think, well, how the hell can that be? Well, that's a family resemblance category, roughly speaking, and lots of the things that we use are family resemblance categories. There's a prototype, and then if you have enough of the features of that prototype, imagine the prototype has 10 features, and if you have 6 of those features, you get to be in that category. But it means that the category is actually quite diverse, and that's one of the problems that plagues psychiatry as a science and clinical psychology as a science. It's a really big problem, because if the categories aren't homogeneous, then it's very difficult to draw conclusions about the members of the category. And the psychologists and the psychiatrists claim that those are scientific categories, but they're not, and they can't be, partly because they're aimed at the classification of health or ideal versus non-health or non-ideal, and partly because they play multiple roles. I mean, the category isn't there just to provide neat demarcations for scientific study. The category is there to give people a language to talk about certain sets of symptoms, to diagnose, because when you come in and you have a set of symptoms, you might want to know what they are, so that you also know what they aren't. It's really a relief often to find a diagnosis. And then of course the diagnosis has certain implications for treatment and for billing and for all of that, so the category has to play all of those roles. So there's multiple types of category, and the categories that we're talking about in relationship to mythology aren't scientific categories. They're categories about the world construed as a place to act. So here's a way to think about it. You're always looking at the world through a framework of reference, and you have to do that because there isn't very much of you. You can't see the whole world at once, and in fact the amount of the world you actually see is so small you can't believe it. The central part of your vision is zipping around, producing a pretty high resolution representation of exactly what you're looking at, but outside of that center, like if I look at you, I can't see her eyes. I can see her glasses, but barely. I can't even tell whether you're male or female. The person past that, I can't see at all. Now you don't notice that, you don't notice that you're that blind, because your central vision is always popping around, illuminating that tiny space. But you're so damn blind, it's just mind-boggling. And I'm sure some of you have seen the Invisible Gorilla video, where a gorilla comes into the video and you don't notice, which is somewhat shocking because you would think that you would notice a gorilla. But what happens is that you actually don't notice something unless it interferes with what you're doing. And because what are you going to do? Notice everything? You can't do that. You can hardly notice anything. So what you do is you pick something to focus on. It's usually something that you value, because why else would you focus on it? So that means that your value system determines the direction of your perception. Bloody well think about that for a minute. That's a Buddhist idea, right? People live in a kind of illusion, and sometimes that illusion causes suffering, and they can transform the way they look at the world, and that can release them from their suffering. But the idea that you do live in an illusion, well, I don't know if it's exactly an illusion, but you certainly do live within a framework of perception that's determined by your values. Now that is so weird, you know, because we never think of the world as something that reveals itself through our values, but of course it does, because you look at what you want, you aim at what you want, and once you've aimed, the world lays itself out for you, and that's exactly how perception works. That's why I represented it this way. You're always somewhere, that's point A, and that's somewhere in some place in some time, and you always have some notion about what you want to have happen next. You know, you're going to go to the next class, maybe you've got a plan after this. In this class you have a plan, you're hoping to learn something, I presume, and maybe you have a goal with regards to a grade, and that's nested inside your desire to get a degree, and that's nested inside your desire to be educated and to have a career and have a successful life. So attending to me at the moment, the reason you're doing that is because all of those values exist within you simultaneously, focusing your attention. And so you're attending to me and not to something else, assuming that all of you with your computers open aren't surfing the web, which you might be, but assuming that you're focusing, whatever you're focusing on is directed by what you value. And some of that can be unconscious. In fact, a lot of it is unconscious, because you know it's very difficult for you to get control of what you pay attention to. You know what that's like. You're trying to study, it's kind of a boring paper. Christ, your attention is just like everywhere, you know. Maybe you'll vacuum under the bed instead of doing reading the paper, you know. You can't get a grip on that thing, so your attention has an autonomy. And that's another psychoanalytic idea, you know, because you kind of think, well, you're in control. It's like, really? You ever try telling yourself what to do? How does that work for you? I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. Right, sure you are. Yeah, I'm going to quit eating sugar for a month. It's like, how long does that last? It's like 15 minutes, and you're eating like 3 chocolate bars. The empirical viewpoint is in some sense that what you know as a consequence of sense data. And the problem with that proposition is that there is mystery embedded inside the axiomatic presupposition of sense data. So behavioral psychologists believe that animals, and they tried to model animal behavior using these a priori theory, the animal reacted reflexively to a stimulus, and so that's a deterministic machine hypothesis. And that always bothered me, partly because animals don't do that. So for example, if you train a rat to run down a maze, it'll learn how to run down the maze, and then if you bind the back legs of the rat and you put its rear end on a wheeled chariot, it will propel itself through the maze on the wheels. And obviously it didn't learn that reflexively, because there aren't that many wheeled rats. And they just don't have that kind of experience. And so the rat's perfectly capable of modifying what it learned in this hypothetically deterministic manner to react to an entirely different set of challenges and come up with exactly the same solution. There was an old behaviorist joke that under controlled laboratory conditions, an animal will do exactly what it damn well pleases. And I like that very much. And the problem with the behaviorist theory of stimulus response was the axiomatic presupposition that the stimulus was given. That you just look at the world and there's the stimulus right in front of you, that takes no effort, and you merely respond reflexively to it. And that's so wrong that it's almost incalculable, because it turns out that perceiving the world is so complex that in some real sense, not only do we not know how we do it, but it looks impossible. And part of the reason that it's impossible, and this is again why empiricism is an incomplete theoretical account of the genesis of knowledge, is that there are literally, or close enough to literally, an infinite number of ways to look at anything. And that's because everything is not only complex in and of itself, at the microcosmic level, almost beyond imagination, but that everything is also situated in a context, which is actually a determining element of the nature of the thing, and the context, expanded enough, actually takes everything into account. And so that makes perception a very weird phenomenon. For another reason, I was always amused, for example, when I traveled with my family when I was young, on our summer vacations, we used to do things like get out and look at the border between Canada and the United States.
And that's a very weird thing to do, because you can actually do it, and you can step across it. And people treat that as if it's magic in some sense, because part of us knows that that border is not there, right? It's not a part of the objective world. And yet, well, and yet it is, because there you are standing beside it. And then if you look at aerial views, you can see the farmers' fields end exactly where the border is. And so things like borders between countries inhabit this weird space between the objective and the subjective that's a magic space. And it actually turns out that almost everything we perceive has that degree of magicality about it. I've thought also about such things as people's proclivity to go to museums, maybe in Nashville, for example, or Memphis, to go look at Elvis Presley's guitar. And you think, well, what exactly are you looking at when you go look at Elvis Presley's guitar? Because first of all, it's a mass-produced guitar, and so why not just look at another guitar? And you think, well, that's not the same thing. It's like, well, why isn't it the same thing? Because it's not. And the reason is that the guitar is not merely something, and this is the thing you perceive, it's not merely something made up of the guitar atoms, let's say, and the guitar molecules. It's also an artifact that was embedded in a context across a period of time. And that embeddedness of that artifact is part of what you perceive when you see an artifact like a celebrity, something a celebrity owned, or the relic of a saint, let's say. And so, and you can say, well, that's all an overlay on top of perception, and that would be fine, except that's wrong. There's no data, so to speak, that support that viewpoint. That's not how perception works. Perception is unbelievably complicated. So we see regularities of being, and some of those, impediments and affordances is the technical term, we tend to perceive as objects. But we also see the possibilities of being. But the problem with that is that the world of objects, potentially relevant objects, and the world of possibility is vast beyond our comprehension. And so then we have another problem that emerges as a consequence of that, which is a key and signal problem, and the fact that it has been solved precipitously and carelessly, hastily, is actually the reason for the culture war that's raging today. And that is that we have to prioritize our perceptions. We have to prioritize our perceptions to get access to the sense data that hypothetically informs us. We have to see the world through a system of value. And why would I say a system of value? Well, a system of value is a system of priorities, right? Because to value something is to make it more important than other things that it's being compared to. And why do you need a hierarchy of perceptual priority in order to see? And the answer is, well, you can't see everything at once. And so you can only see one thing at a time. And which thing? And the answer is the thing you think is most important to see at that moment. And then the question is, well, and this is the question, why is that the most important thing to see at the moment? So imagine, this is true in the auditory domain, in the tactile domain, all sensory domains. And you think that perception is a passive action and that we act upon the consequences of our perception, and this is just not true at all. There's no level of the analysis of perception neurophysiologically where you can separate action from perception. So for example, when you're looking at the world, although you don't know this, your eyes are moving back and forth very, very quickly. They have to move. If they stop moving for more than 1/10 of a second, you go blind because you saturate the neurons that you're using to perceive so intensely with the repetitive stimulation that they just shut down. And so at a micro level, your eyes are vibrating like mad, and then there are saccades above that that are still unconscious, that are less rapid and wider, and then voluntarily, you have voluntary eye fields in the frontal cortex, you move your eyes voluntarily to point to what you want to see, and you do that because the center part of your vision is exceptionally high resolution. Each center vision foveal neuron is connected directly to 10,000 neurons in the primary visual cortex, and then each of those 10,000 is connected to another 10,000. It's very expensive neurophysiological real estate, and if all of your vision was as intensely high resolution as your fovea, which is a very small part of your retina, you'd have to have a brain like an alien. when I talked about hierarchies. Now, it's very important where you are in your hierarchical position with regards to other people in relationship to your mental health. And this is a really important thing to understand, because you have an ancient counter in your brain, and that was the point of the biological comparisons, and lobsters being one set of comparisons, but not only lobsters. We know perfectly well, animal behaviorists, people who know their neuropsychopharmacology, know perfectly well that the serotonergic system operates quite similarly across most animals with complex nervous systems, and one of the things that it does is track relative status position. And in birds, wrens, which is another example I used, a lot of it is power. You know, a wren's a little bird. It's quite a cute bird. It sings very nicely, and you think it's harmless, but it's not. It's a vicious little character. And I used to sit in my backyard and record wren songs on my tape recorder, and the wren that lived in our backyard would dive bomb it, 4 inches away, and it was very brave of him. And he had a little nest that was up in a tree, and there were some nests that we had built, birdhouses, in the neighborhoods nearby, in the yards nearby. And he would go, like half his day spent stuffing those other birdhouses with sticks, so full that no bird could get in them. It was like, this is my damn yard, which is what he was saying when he was singing so beautifully. And you better look the hell out, because if you build, I'm going to stuff your damn house with sticks, and if I see you sitting on a branch, I'm going to dive bomb you and knock you off. And that's power, and that's what wrens do, despite the fact that they're cute. And chickens do the same thing. There are pecking orders among chickens, and virtually every animal. Wolf packs organize themselves into hierarchies, and chimpanzees organize themselves into hierarchies, and there are rat hierarchies, and hierarchical organization is the rule among animals that live somewhat socially, and even those who don't, that occupy the same geographical territory. There has to be some way of organizing access to relatively scarce resources that doesn't result in chronic combat. Because chronic combat, well, look, you're wren A and you're wren B, and you decide to have it out, so you peck yourselves half to death, and you're wren C, and so you got a little bit more patience. You just wait until those two wrens beat each other to death, and then you move in. It's like it's a stupid solution. It doesn't even work for wrens, let alone people. And so, the wrens announce their prowess, and they do that with the quality of their song and their displays, and they indicate to one another who shouldn't be messed with, and then there's a minimum of combat. And you could make a pretty good case that that's power, But it's not like wrens get together and build like wren apartment houses and then go out on collective worm hunt insects, collective insect hunting expeditions and bring them all back and distribute them, or make insect farms so that there's more insects for all the wrens. They haven't got that far, They're competing in a zero-sum game. And that isn't what human beings do. We figured out how to not have zero-sum games a very, very long time ago. And it turns out that if the game you're playing isn't zero-sum, right, which means that there's only a finite number of resources and everybody has to fight to the death for them, and some are going to get the lion's share and others are going to starve. If you're not playing a zero-sum game, then you can learn to cooperate and compete in an intelligent and civilized manner, and all of a sudden, there's more than enough for everyone. Now, still, some people are going to have more than others, but there's nothing. How are you going to stop that? And do you want to? Do you want to only know what? Do you want to only be allowed to know what everyone else knows? You don't get to know anything that anyone else knows, because it's got to be equal. You want everyone to be exactly the same amount of attractive, and if you averaged attractiveness overall and you only allowed each person to be as attractive as the average person, there'd be not much attractiveness left in the world. And it seems to me that would be quite the loss, And strength. You're not allowed to have any additional strength or ambition or talent or let's say athletic ability. It's or artistic ability. I mean, aren't we kind of happy that there's massive inequality in the distribution of talent. I know it's harsh and hard, but you can't expect everybody to have every talent that there is, and it would be a hell of a sacrifice if no one got to have any talent, because it wouldn't be fair. And so I don't get the whole equality of outcome thing. It isn't going to work. There aren't that many geniuses, you know? We want to exploit the geniuses and get them to work for us. And if the price is that somebody has more than you do of something, well, suck it up, for Christ's sake. Well, Jesus, seriously, man. It's like, look, how much more do you have than most people have? You know, you need to make $30,000 a year to be in the top 1% of the socioeconomic distribution worldwide. You know, you always hear about the 1%, right? The evil 1%. And they churn, by the way, because it's not the same people all the time. It's like all of you here are in the evil 1%, and you think, well, that's not very fair, because I was really only talking about within my country. Well, that's convenient for you. You know, it makes it really convenient argument for you. It's like, well, all those other people, those foreigners, they don't count. If they're poor, who the hell cares? It's the Australians that matter, you know. And so, no, that's a non-starter, you know. And by historical standards, you're doing a hell of a lot better than the top 1%. I can tell you that. I read a nice article by a coalition called Human Progress the other day, and they were comparing the typical middle-class person who lives now with Rockefellers in the 1919s, and say, well, would you rather be a middle-class person now or Nelson Rockefeller in 1919? And the answer seemed pretty damn clear that, well, you know, if you were Nelson Rockefeller, then you would have been richer than anyone else. And there's something to be said for that status, right? Because people do like to have more than others. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it is one of the things that we like. And so you'd have that. You'd be richer than everyone else. But there'd be all sorts of things that you have that now that Nelson Rockefeller wouldn't have had a hope of purchasing, like the antibiotics that he would have needed to stop his son from dying, for example, you know, just as a start. And so I think this complaint about inequality. Look, no one likes inequality exactly. You walk down the street. This is why I always get a kick out of people who protest. I'm against poverty. It's like, really? You're against poverty. And you think that's a unique enough attribute so that it was worth your time to make a sign that said that you were against poverty and show other people. It's like, I've never met anyone that was for poverty. You know, you walk down the street with someone who's pretty well off, you know, and they've got 1920s spats on and a bowler, and they're feeling pretty damn rich, and a Stockster certificate sticking out of their back pocket, and, you know, there's a homeless person there, and they give them a good kick, and they say, the more poverty, the better. It's like, no. You know, when people walk down the street and you see homeless people, and they're often, homelessness is a complex problem. Like, you think, well, homeless people are poor. It's like, yeah, man. That's like one problem they have out of 50. And like, I've worked with poor people, you know, in my clinical practice, and poor in multiple dimensions. And many of them, you gave them money, they were just done. Especially if they were like alcoholics and cocaine addicts. As long as they were broke, they had some hope of living through the next month. But as soon as their unemployment check showed up, man, they were face down in the ditch 3 days later, right? Nothing but cocaine and alcohol with all their idiot friends for 3 days. And then they'd show up back in my practice saying, you know, God, I relapsed again. I said, well, what happened? Well, my money came in. It's like, yeah, money's really going to do you a hell of a lot of good. It'll just kill you faster than poverty. Now, not that there's anything good about poverty, but it's not like these are simple problems. You know, walk down the street and you see someone who's been an alcoholic for 20 years, and maybe they're addicted to methamphetamines as well, or maybe they're schizophrenic. It's like, it isn't unequal distribution of monetary resources that is the primary cause for that problem, and it isn't going to be some sort of straightforward redistribution that's going to fix it, because it's way more complicated than that. And so, and then the whole power thing too. It's like, look, I get it. I get the left wing issue, and I really do. And I think I get it better than the damn left-wingers get it. Because, you know, most of the radical types, they follow Marx, and they say, well, one of Marx's dictums was that capital tended to accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people.
If you pursue the things in your life that are meaningful once you've oriented yourself, and that means accepting the challenges that come along with that, because one of the things that you'll find, you even find this in music, if you know a piece of music completely, then you tend not to want to listen to it anymore. There still has to be some challenge in it. You still have to track it, and sometimes music is so complex you just can't. It just sounds like noise. Modern music is often like that because it's so, well, it tends towards the chaotic, and so I find it difficult to listen to because I can't get a handle on it. But then, you know, so it's too challenging. And then there's other music, pop music is often like this. It's catchy the first 2 times you hear it, and then you never want to hear it again. It's too much, there's too much predictability and not enough chaos. And hopefully you find a piece of music that's somewhere in the middle. You can listen to it 50 or 100 times, and each time you listen to it, there's still some new nuance in it that you didn't expect before. And so, well, you kind of want to set up your life like that, so that, and I think you see that the phenomena of meaning manifests itself at the area, at the locale of optimal challenge. So if the thing, so one of the things, for example, I might say, well, let's say you want to set some goals for yourself. We say, well, they're remarkable goals, but they're too unattainable. You're just going to find it frustrating to pursue them. It's going to be too punishing. And then we might say, well, here's a goal, and you think, well, I could do that, you know, standing on my head. There's no challenge in it. Well, both of those two extremes are going to leave you in a state that isn't characterized by the optimization of engagement and meaning. One is too difficult, it's too punishing, it's the judge and nothing else, and the other is the ultimate and merciful mothers. It's like you win no matter how you play. So then you calibrate it. You say, well, you know, I'm up for a challenge at this level. I wouldn't recommend that, because that's just a bit like people do that. You might want to investigate your character in detail and decide, you know, what's going on at this level of analysis. That's pretty harsh, but you can certainly continually retool yourself at more micro levels, and I think what you do is you pick the level of retooling that optimizes your willingness to be engaged in it. And then what's so interesting about that is that, I think, is that you get the benefits of perfection, so to speak, while still being imperfect. Your actual imperfection has nothing to do with it. What's relevant is the journey that you're undertaking to rectify the imperfection. So instead of aiming to be the entity without flaws, you're aiming to be the entity that continues to realize its flaws and overcome them. Well, that's a game you can play forever. You don't take responsibility for things that you don't accept. You only take responsibility for things that you do accept. You say, well, the world is fundamentally flawed because its fundamental nature is vulnerability, intolerable vulnerability. I'm not going to take any responsibility for that. That's really Cain's attitude in the story of Cain and Abel. He externalizes responsibility for the catastrophe of his life, and therefore he doesn't make the right sacrifices. And so the paradoxical injunction here is, accept responsibility for the catastrophe of your life, and that way you transcend it simultaneously. And there's an unbelievably hopeful message in there, and the message is, you're actually strong enough to do that, you just don't know it. And you won't find out till you do it. You can't find out till you do it. But if you did it, you'd find out that it was true. It's a massive risk. It's the ultimate in risks, right? You have to be willing to lose your life in order to find it. It's like, exactly right. So that picture, when I started to understand that picture, well, every time I look at it, it just blows me away. I can't, it's unbelievably, it's an unbelievably sophisticated set of ideas. But I don't think it's much different, really, than this idea. I mean, Buddha finds his enlightenment under a tree. It's not fluke that that's the case. That's his natural environment. And he's sitting in the lotus here. The lotus opens up. It's this thing that springs up from the depths
And he sits there illuminated the same way. He's got a halo that's the sun that stands for higher consciousness. And he's transcended by accepting the fact that life is suffering. He's transcended the limitations that are part of mortality. You see that symbol there? That swastika, you see it there? It's reversed. The Nazis reversed it. Well, think about that. I mean, they weren't stupid. Their symbolism, their symbols had meaning. Is what the swastika represented was what this represents reversed. Well, that's a very bad idea. This is the thing that this idea is what enables people to transcend their suffering. And Buddha said, well, don't be too attached to things. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean deny the world. It might mean deny the world if you're too in love with the material, like with material well-being, let's say, then your pathway to transcendence and meaning might be to abandon that because it's constraining you. It's making you less than you could be. But the fundamental lesson, the more fundamental lesson that's underneath that is don't let what you are stop you from being what you could be. Right. And so then the question is, well, what do you identify with? Do you identify with what you are? Then you're a tyrant. Do you identify with chaos? Because that's the opposite of order, say. Then you're nihilistic. Well, you don't identify with either of those. You know that they're both necessary. You know that you have to live with both of them. But you identify with the capacity to continually transcend what you are. And then you seek out error. That's what humility is. It's like, I'm error-ridden. It's like, so I want to see. I want to put myself in a situation where I can discover one of my errors, hopefully not in a way that's going to knock me completely out of the game, right? I want to seek out a challenge. I want to find out where my limits are. I want to find out where there's not enough of me yet. And I want to do that in a way that's engaging because, you know, you can wear yourself out fighting dragons, obviously. You can exhaust yourself completely, and that's not helpful. You know, one of the things I learned, for example, when I was coaching lawyers, these were people who had very high-end careers, and so they had an infinite workload. No matter how much they worked, flat out, there was always way more work that they should do. It's a very difficult thing to learn to manage. And so they were exhausting themselves, and I said, well, you know, you have to work less per day. It's like, well, no, that's not happening. I can't do that. And so what I learned over time was, okay, so this is what you have to do. Every 3 months you have to block off 4 days and go have a vacation. And you have to plan that in advance so it's in your calendar so that your secretary doesn't book your time. And then you need that because you have to recuperate enough so that you can work as hard as you're going to work. And of course they were nervous about that. And I said, well, look, we can calibrate this. Let's keep track of your billable hours over the next year and see if they increase or decrease. Because I bet you if you take more time off, you'll actually have more billable hours. You'll actually have your cake and eat it too. You'll get to have a vacation and you'll be more productive. And that inevitably that was what happened. And so that's a matter of calibrating the game properly, right? You want to play a game that you can play today, but also one that you can play next week and next month. We're not talking about, you know, your career this week. We're talking about you having a career that lasts 30 years, that doesn't kill you, that doesn't make you hate yourself or the job, that doesn't make you bitter, that doesn't wear you to a frazzle. So it has to be optimized. And so I think that you can, in fact, decide to take on the load that's optimally meaningful if you want, and then you get to have your cake and eat it too. You're on the pathway to continual incremental improvement. You only have to burn off a feather at a time instead of having the whole bloody thing burst into flames. But it's a constant source of renewal. And there's an idea that to be renewed, you have to drink the water of life, right? That's an old mythological idea. And what's the water? The water of life, chaos is water. Water is chaos. Water is what washes away too much order. And to stay continually, let's say, refreshed by the water of life is to take on exactly the right amount of chaos to make sure that your garden is properly nourished. And I think meaning is actually the marker of that. And as I said, you know that I wouldn't consider myself either naive or particularly optimistic person. I don't think I'm either of those. But this is actually an idea, this is one of the only ideas that I've ever found that I really believe to be rock solid. I actually think that it's true. And it's very optimistic because it says you can use your sense of meaning to calibrate your progress through life.
But there's rules. You have to aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive. Now, and that's subject to update, because what the hell do you know? But you start by aiming at the star you can see rather than the dimmer one that you can't yet perceive. And then you decide that you're going to do that honestly, right? That's a big decision. So the first decision, I think, in some sense, is a decision of love. You're going to decide that being is worthwhile and that you're going to work for its betterment. And that's a decision that's based on love. And the second decision is based on truth. Having made that decision, you're going to play a straight game. Having made those two decisions, I think that you can allow your sense of meaning to calibrate your pathway. And then what's so interesting is that you hit a state that's as close to paradisal as you're going to hit right away, because being engaged like that, it's better to be engaged in the solution of a complex problem than not to have a problem at all. And that's no different than saying it's better for there to be being than non-being, because being is a problem. And so if you want to have no problems, then you have no being. And you could say, well, being is so miserable that maybe that's the route we should take. And fair enough, but maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the damn problem. It can be a problem worth solving, and you can be so engaged in solving the problem that it justifies the fact that the problem exists. And then you get to have the problem and the solution at the same time, and maybe that's better than not having the problem at all. And I believe that, because one of the things I have seen, and I've seen this being so interesting when I've been lecturing to people, especially more recently, and this is also manifested itself on YouTube. I'm talking to people a lot about responsibility, and it's young men in particular that seem to be responding to that. And I think that's partly because I think that young women, in some sense, have their responsibility map already laid out for them. It's also less voluntary in some sense for women, because they have more complicated problems to solve in the first part of their life, right? Because they have to get the family problem solved. But whatever. I've been talking in a very delineated manner about responsibility, which is a strange thing to sell to people, but responsibility is what gives your life meaning. And so then you might say, well, then take on ultimate responsibility. And what happens? You have an ultimately meaningful life. And then you might say, well, if your life is ultimately meaningful, it doesn't matter if it's punctuated by tragedy or even predicated on tragedy. It's worth it. And I think that's true. And everything I've seen indicates to me that's true. Every time I get my clients to take on more responsibility, and it isn't an injunction. You're a bad person, you should take on responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. You can define the damn responsibility. It isn't something that someone else should impose on you. It's not a matter of doing what you should do in some abstract manner. It's not that. It's the choice of what game you're going to play. And you can play the game of the seeker, I would say, and if you play that game, then everyone wins. And it's the best game you can play. And so the answer, in some sense, to the tragedy of life, to the catastrophe of life, to the fall, is to adopt the responsibility of mortality that goes along with that, and to play that game maximally. And paradoxically, it's in the willingness to do that that the solution emerges. And I have done my best with every single thing I've talked to you guys about. I have done my best to do what Dostoevsky does in his novels, which is I make a proposition and then I spend months or years trying to figure out if I can take the bloody thing apart, if there's something wrong with it, because I want to find out. I want to hit it with a hammer and see if it breaks. And what I've been trying to do is to tell you all the things that I've gathered, let's say, or laid out or articulated or discovered over the last 30 years that I have not been able to break with the biggest hammer that I could take to them. And I guess that's the fundamental one, is that I believe that the idea that lurks in these images, derived from very different cultures, it's the same idea. Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life.
No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. So if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. Because the rule is, you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt, it stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe. And that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. Could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly as an individual. Because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it'd be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, and not everyone does, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far could you take that? If you stopped wasting time, and if you stopped lying, and if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say, why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out.
You don't have anything better to do. And there's nothing in it, as far as I've been able to tell, there's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good. And then maybe you could help make that manifest in the world. And maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems then. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse. So, and then you think, well, what's the barrier? And the barrier is, are you willing to accept the responsibility? And part of the answer to that is, reduce the damn responsibility until it's tolerable. You don't have to fix everything at once. You could just start by fixing the things that you could fix. Or you could even do it more. You could do it with even less self-sacrifice. You could start by fixing only the things that you want to fix. God, you can get a massive way that way. So do it. See what happens. That's what you should have been taught in university right from the beginning. It's like, aim at the highest good. Tool yourself into something that can attain it. And go out there and manifest it in the world. And everything that comes your way will be a blessing. And so all you have to do is give up your resentment and your hatred. I know that's a hard thing to give up because you have plenty of reason for it.